Introduction: Why the more we chase, the less we often see. Have you ever noticed that the harder you chase something, the further away it seems to move? Consider the experience of holding a handful of fine river sand. If you press your fingers together with absolute, white-knuckled force, convinced that grip equals possession, the grains rapidly force their way out between your knuckles, slipping away until your palm is nearly empty. Yet, if you cup your hand loosely, holding the sand with calm awareness and gentle presence, it rests peacefully right where it is. Human desire often operates by this exact same counterintuitive law. We live in a culture that champions relentless pursuit. From our earliest days, we are taught that if we want something badly enough, we must chase it down, wrestle it into submission, and force reality to bend to our will. We apply this frantic energy to love, to career success, to financial security, to social approval, and even to our own inner peace. We treat happiness like a distant fugitive hiding just out of reach, requiring us to run faster, sweat harder, and sacrifice our present sanity for a promised future. Yet, beneath this non-stop activity lies a hidden cost. When every ambition is fueled by a quiet, gnawing terror that you are not enough. That time is running out, that you will be left behind, or that your worth is entirely conditional upon your next achievement, something subtle happens to your mind. Desperation sets in. Desperation is not merely an emotion, it is an energetic and cognitive state. It is the internal alarm bell that whispers, I am empty, I am lacking, and I will not survive unless I secure this external thing right now. When you operate from this state, your perception narrows. You stop seeing the subtle openings, the graceful opportunities, and the natural rhythms of life. Instead, you develop tunnel vision, focusing solely on the object of your fixation with a frantic intensity that repels what you want most. In relationships, this looks like clinging tightly to someone out of fear of abandonment, suffocating the very connection you hope to nurture. In professional life, it looks like pushing so hard for validation and outcomes that you compromise your creativity, alienate colleagues, and burn out your nervous system. In personal growth, it looks like treating self-improvement as a punishment for your current flaws rather than an act of stewardship for your potential. This book explores one of the greatest paradoxes of human psychology and personal transformation. The moment you stop chasing life from a place of panic and lack, reality begins responding to the person you have become. This is not a call to passive resignation, nor is it an invitation to abandon your ambitions. Rather, it is an invitation to revolutionize how you desire. It is about shifting your internal anchor from desperate external dependence to unshakable inner authority. When you stop begging life for permission to be worthy, happy, or secure, your entire energetic posture changes. Your nervous system shifts out of survival panic and into creative flow. Your decisions become intentional rather than reactive. Your presence becomes magnetic rather than demanding. Over the course of the following 15 chapters, we are going to deconstruct the mechanics of chasing. We will examine the hidden psychology of emotional desperation, explore how the survival brain distorts your perception of reality, dismantle the addiction to external validation, and learn how to build a quiet confidence that changes how you move through the world. You will discover why true power lives in surrender, how to align your daily habits with your highest identity, and what happens when you finally stop fighting reality and start mastering yourself. You do not need to claw your way through existence to matter. You do not need to beg for a place at the table of fulfillment. The transformation you are seeking is not found by running faster in the wrong direction, it is found by pausing, turning inward, and becoming the anchor in your own life. Take a deep breath, release the white-knuckle grip on your current worries, and step into a new way of engaging with your desires. Let us begin. Reflection questions. Where in my current life am I operating from a sense of panic or frantic chasing rather than quiet confidence? What am I desperately trying to force right now, and what fear is driving that urgency? How might my daily experiences change if I acted from a belief that my basic worth is already secure? Chapter Summary. The harder we chase certain experiences or outcomes from a place of lack, the more elusive they often become. Relentless pursuit driven by fear and scarcity creates an internal state of desperation that alters our perception and behavior. Desperation causes tunnel vision, leading to reactive decisions that often push what we want further away. True personal transformation begins when we shift from chasing life out of emptiness to creating from inner completeness. Moving from desperation to inner authority shifts the nervous system from survival panic into creative flow. Releasing the need to chase is not passive resignation, it is an intentional pivot toward emotion. Chapter 1: The Hidden Psychology of Chasing. We rarely pause to examine the invisible engine driving our daily ambitions. From the outside, human motivation appears straightforward. We identify a goal, calculate the steps required to reach it, and expend energy until it is achieved. Society praises this linear formula, equating relentless motion with ambition and stillness with stagnation. Yet, if you look beneath the polished surface of human behavior, you discover a far more complex psychological ecosystem. Much of what we label as ambition is actually an unconscious, frantic escape from inner discomfort. To understand why chasing often backfires, we must first look at the psychological mechanics of desire. When a desire is born from inspiration, curiosity, or a genuine desire to express your potential, it feels expansive. It invites creativity, patience, and a sense of playful engagement with the world. You can work hard toward an inspired goal while still remaining entirely at peace with who you are in the present moment. There is no internal panic, no underlying threat, and no existential emergency attached to the outcome. However, when a desire is born from psychological lack, the entire internal landscape shifts dramatically. This is where chasing begins. Psychological lack occurs when the mind concludes that a particular external condition, whether it is a romantic partner, a specific income bracket, a prestigious title, or universal approval, is the mandatory ticket to feeling safe, worthy, or complete. In this state, the desired object is no longer viewed as a pleasant addition to a full life, it becomes a life raft for a drowning psyche. Consider how this alters the architecture of human thought. When you believe that your fundamental well-being depends on acquiring something outside of yourself, your brain immediately registers a threat. If you don't get it, you subconsciously believe you will remain inadequate, unloved, or exposed. This activates the mind's threat detection systems, flooding your consciousness with urgency. Urgency feels productive, but neurologically, it is panic dressed in a suit. It whispers that time is running out, that others are winning while you are falling behind, and that your current reality is fundamentally unacceptable. This internal state shapes every behavioral choice you make. When you approach dating from a deep-seated fear of being alone, you stop evaluating whether a person is genuinely compatible with your life. Instead, you focus entirely on managing their perception of you, suppressing your boundaries, ignoring red flags, and overinvesting prematurely just to secure a guarantee against rejection. You are not relating to another human being, you are desperately negotiating for emotional insurance. In professional environments, this same psychology manifests as an exhausting compulsion to prove oneself. Every project, every presentation, and every interaction becomes a high-stakes trial where your entire identity is on the line. Because your self-worth is tethered to the outcome, constructive feedback feels like a personal indictment, and ordinary setbacks feel like catastrophic failures. You overwork not because the work is deeply meaningful, but because stopping would mean sitting in the quiet silence of your own perceived inadequacy. The tragic irony of this dynamic is that other people and the world at large are exquisitely sensitive to this energetic signature. Human beings possess mirror neurons and a deeply evolved intuitive radar for desperation. When someone approaches us wrapped in invisible neediness, clinging too fast, agreeing too readily, or pushing too hard for a specific response, our subconscious mind registers caution. We instinctively pull back to protect our own space. The very intensity meant to secure connection or opportunity becomes the barrier that repels it. Breaking free from this cycle requires radical self-honesty. It requires looking at your ambitions, your relationships, and your daily pursuits and asking a courageous question: what emotional deficit am I trying to fix with this external achievement? Until you bring awareness to the hidden fears driving your chase, you will remain trapped on a treadmill of perpetual striving, running faster and faster toward a horizon that always stays the same distance away. True liberation begins the moment you dare to step off that treadmill, turn inward, and confront the emptiness you were trying to outrun. Chapter Summary. Much of what society calls ambition is often an unconscious, frantic escape from internal discomfort and perceived inadequacy. Desires born from inspiration feel expansive and calm, while desires born from psychological lack trigger panic and urgency. When external goals are treated as life rafts for a fragile self-worth, the mind enters a state of existential threat. Operating from psychological lack distorts relationships, leading to boundary erosion, premature investment, and emotional negotiation. Professional desperation turns ordinary setbacks into catastrophic failures and transforms work into a frantic trial for validation. Human intuition easily detects neediness and desperation, often causing others to instinctively pull away. Lasting transformation. Chapter 2: The Invisible Laws That Shape Reality. When we observe the physical world, we are conditioned to believe that cause and effect are purely mechanical. We assume that if we apply a specific amount of physical force, push through enough closed doors, and hustle relentlessly, the universe must hand over the exact result we demand. Yet, anyone who has lived through the complex twists of human experience knows that reality rarely bends to brute force alone. There are invisible laws operating beneath the surface of our everyday lives, laws governed not by physical mechanics, but by psychological alignment, emotional frequency, and the subtle architecture of our inner state. To understand these invisible laws, we must examine how our internal posture quietly programs our external environment. Everything you experience is filtered through the lens of your prevailing mental and emotional state. If your internal baseline is defined by scarcity, fear, and the frantic conviction that you are running out of time, your brain operates like a specialized filter designed to validate that exact fear. It ignores abundance, overlooks supportive connections, and magnifies every obstacle into an insurmountable wall. You do not experience reality as it is, you experience reality as you are. Consider how this principle governs human interaction and opportunity. When you walk into a room, whether it is a business negotiation, a social gathering, or an interview, carrying an invisible aura of desperation, you project a subtle frequency of demand. Even if you say all the right words, your nonverbal cues, vocal cadence, and nervous energy communicate an unspoken message: I need you to save me, validate me, or give me this so I can feel okay. This creates subtle resistance in others. People naturally recoil from the weight of someone else's unmanaged expectations because deep down, no one wants to carry the heavy burden of another person's emotional rescue. Conversely, when you cultivate an internal state of wholeness, your entire energetic signature shifts. You begin operating under what can be described as the law of emotional equilibrium. You recognize that your worth is non-negotiable and that your survival does not hang in the balance of this single interaction, contract, or relationship. This quiet self-possession completely alters how you show up. You listen more deeply, speak with measured intention, and hold space for others without needing them to fulfill a hidden deficit within you. Remarkably, the external world responds to this shift with profound consistency. When you stop gripping reality so tightly, the friction between you and your desires begins to dissolve. Opportunities that once required exhausting, uphill battles start aligning with a natural, organic momentum. This is not because of mystical wishful thinking or passive waiting, but because clear thinking, relaxed nervous systems, and authentic confidence naturally invite trust and collaboration from others. People are drawn to grounded energy the way plants turn toward the sun. Mastering these invisible laws requires a fundamental shift in perspective. You must stop trying to manipulate the external reflection and instead focus entirely on tending to the mirror. If your life feels like a constant struggle, if doors remain stubbornly closed, or if relationships continually dissolve into anxiety, stop looking outward for someone to blame or something else to conquer. Turn your attention inward. Examine the quiet assumptions, hidden fears, and desperate demands you are broadcasting into the world. When you change the frequency of your inner state, the external mirror has no choice but to reflect a brand new reality back to you. Chapter Summary. Human life is governed by invisible laws rooted in psychological alignment and emotional frequency rather than sheer physical force alone. Your internal baseline acts as a perceptual filter, shaping how you interpret opportunities, obstacles, and everyday experiences. Operating from desperation projects an unspoken demand for rescue, triggering instinctive resistance and caution in others. Cultivating an internal state of wholeness shifts your energetic signature, projecting calm self-possession instead of needy pressure. The law of emotional equilibrium dictates that when your Chapter 3: Understanding the Mind. To truly understand why chasing backfires, we must journey into the intricate machinery of the human brain. We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures who carefully weigh options, analyze data, and make measured decisions based on long-term goals. Yet, neuroscience reveals a very different picture. Beneath our sophisticated veneer of logic lies a deeply ancient survival architecture designed not for happiness, self-actualization, or peace of mind, but for one primary objective: keeping us alive in a dangerous world. At the center of this architecture sits the amygdala, the brain's sentinel for threat detection. When you operate from scarcity, fear, or emotional desperation, your brain does not perceive a missed opportunity or a broken relationship as a mere inconvenience. It registers it as a life-threatening emergency. The moment this survival alarm is triggered, a biochemical cascade floods your system. Cortisol and adrenaline surge through your veins, your heart rate accelerates, blood flow is redirected away from your higher cognitive centers and toward your limbs, and your prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, emotional regulation, and creative problem-solving, effectively goes offline. This neurological shift explains why frantic chasing always leads to poor decisions. When you are trapped in survival mode, your brain defaults to tunnel vision and rigid, repetitive patterns. You lose the cognitive flexibility required to see nuanced solutions, read social cues accurately, or evaluate risks wisely. Instead, you default to impulsive, short-term reactions designed to relieve immediate anxiety. You text the person who is pulling away, you accept a misaligned job offer out of panic, or you force a creative project before it is ready simply because the silence of uncertainty feels unbearable. Contrast this survival state with the neurology of inner calm. When you consciously regulate your emotions, practice self-compassion, and anchor yourself in a sense of internal security, your nervous system experiences a shift into parasympathetic dominance. The panic subsides. Blood flow returns to the prefrontal cortex, lighting up the neural pathways responsible for long-term planning, empathy, emotional intelligence, and strategic insight. In this state, your mind stops viewing the world as a hostile battleground full of scarce resources and instead perceives it as an expansive landscape of possibility. This neurological reality illuminates a profound truth: your external results will never exceed the internal capacity of your nervous system to hold them. If your baseline is chronic panic, even if you manage to hustle your way into success, your brain will experience that success as a threat, driving you right back into frantic overcompensation or self-sabotage. True mastery, therefore, is not about learning how to push harder against your biology. It is about learning how to soothe your survival brain so your higher mind can finally take the helm. When you train your mind to pause in the face of urgency, you interrupt the ancient survival loop. You give your biology a chance to recalibrate. You stop reacting to phantom predators and start responding to actual reality with clarity, poise, and unshakable grace. That is the moment the desperate chase ends, and true creation begins. Chapter Summary. The human brain is equipped with ancient survival mechanisms designed to detect threats rather than optimize happiness or long-term fulfillment. Desperation and scarcity trigger the amygdala, flooding the body with stress hormones and shutting down higher-level executive functions. Operating in survival mode causes cognitive tunnel vision, leading to impulsive decisions, poor risk assessment, and repeating cycles of anxiety. Conscious emotional regulation shifts the nervous system into balance, restoring blood flow to the prefrontal cortex for strategic thinking and creativity. Your external achievements can never permanently exceed the internal capacity and baseline regulation of your nervous system. True personal mastery requires learning how to soothe the survival brain rather than constantly forcing yourself to hustle through panic. Interrupting the urgent survival loop with calm awareness opens the door to clarity, poise, and authentic personal power. Chapter 4: The Power of Belief. We walk through life imagining that our eyes are objective windows recording the world exactly as it exists. We assume that a situation is inherently stressful, a relationship is inherently doomed, or an opportunity is inherently out of reach. Yet, modern psychology and cognitive science reveal a startling reality: we do not see the world as it is, we see the world as our core beliefs dictate. Beliefs act as the silent architects of human experience, shaping our perceptions long before conscious logic ever enters the room. To understand how belief governs your life, you must look at how the brain handles incoming sensory data. Every second, millions of bits of information bombard your nervous system. If your conscious mind had to process every single detail, you would experience instant cognitive overload. To prevent this, the brain relies on a specialized filtering system known as the reticular activating system. This mental filter scans the environment for information that matches your deeply held beliefs while systematically ignoring everything that contradicts them. If you carry a core belief that you are fundamentally unlovable, your reticular activating system will hunt down and amplify every minor slight, delayed text, or distant glance as absolute proof of your unworthiness. It will completely gloss over the warmth, kindness, and loyalty directed your way because those experiences do not fit your internal script. You are essentially wearing colored glasses, yet walking around convinced that the entire world is painted in that exact shade. This mechanism explains why desperate chasing is so intimately tied to limiting beliefs. When you believe at a subconscious level that abundance is scarce, that success is reserved for an elite few, or that your value depends entirely on continuous output, your brain treats those beliefs as absolute laws of physics. Every action you take becomes an attempt to manage a hostile reality dictated by those invisible constraints. You hustle out of fear because your belief system tells you that stopping means starvation, irrelevance, or emotional ruin. Transforming your life, therefore, does not begin by changing your external circumstances, it begins by auditing and rewriting your internal beliefs. This is not about toxic positivity or mindlessly repeating hollow affirmations while your stomach remains tied in knots of anxiety. Real belief restructuring is a rigorous psychological practice of inquiry. It requires examining the foundational assumptions you formed in childhood or through past trauma and asking whether they still hold any objective truth today. When you consciously challenge a limiting belief, such as trading the assumption that, I have to fight for everything I get, for the empowered perspective that, value creation is a natural, flowing exchange, you begin to recalibrate your mental filter. Suddenly, your brain starts noticing opportunities, collaborations, and supportive spaces that were invisible to you before. The world hasn't fundamentally changed, but your perception of it has shifted entirely. Unlocking your true potential requires recognizing that your current reality is simply a mirror reflection of your most familiar thoughts and beliefs. If you want a different reflection, you cannot smash the mirror with frantic effort. You must gently, deliberately change the image you are projecting from within. When your core beliefs shift from scarcity to wholeness, the desperate chase ceases because you finally realize there is nowhere else you need to run to be complete. Chapter Summary. We do not experience an objective reality, but rather a world filtered and shaped by our core beliefs and assumptions. The brain utilizes a specialized mental filter to scan the environment for evidence that validates existing beliefs while ignoring contradictions. Limiting core beliefs about unworthiness or scarcity drive hypervigilance, forcing the mind to interpret neutral events as threats. Desperate chasing is sustained by subconscious belief systems that frame life as a zero-sum game of constant survival. Real belief transformation requires active psychological inquiry rather than superficial positive affirmations or forced optimism. Updating your internal belief system recalibrates your mental filter, revealing opportunities and supportive environments that were previously ignored. Shifting from scarcity to wholeness dissolves the internal pressure to chase, anchoring your identity in steady. Chapter 5, Reprogramming Limiting Patterns. Understanding how beliefs shape your reality is a vital first shift, but intellectual awareness alone rarely rewrites deeply ingrained behavioral patterns. You can sit in quiet meditation acknowledging that you are worthy, only to find yourself sliding right back into anxious people-pleasing, overworking, or frantically chasing the moment a high-pressure situation arises. This happens because thoughts and beliefs are not merely abstract ideas floating in the mind, they carve physical pathways in the brain. Over years of repetition, these neural pathways become automatic highways of survival, running silently beneath the surface of conscious choice. To alter these entrenched patterns, you must understand how neuroplasticity works in daily life. The human brain is remarkably adaptable, possessing the lifelong capacity to prune old, dysfunctional wiring and build new, life-affirming circuits. However, the brain does not update its programming through passive wishing or occasional bursts of motivation. It requires consistent, deliberate interruption of old habits followed by the active rehearsal of new responses. Consider the anatomy of a limiting pattern. Every reactive cycle begins with a specific trigger. Perhaps an unanswered email, a minor critical comment from a colleague, or a sudden wave of financial uncertainty. Instantly, your nervous system fires off an old familiar program, panic sets in, your chest tightens, and your mind races to fix, control, or outrun the perceived danger. In the past, you surrendered to this script automatically, reacting with frantic urgency to soothe the discomfort. Reprogramming this pattern requires introducing a deliberate pause between the trigger and your response. This brief interval is the birthplace of all human freedom. Viktor Frankl famously noted that between stimulus and response lies a space, and in that space rests your power to choose your response. When you catch yourself sliding into old survival habits, you must gently interrupt the momentum. Take a deliberate breath, step back from the immediate impulse to fix or force, and name what is happening without judgment. You might silently acknowledge, I am feeling scarcity right now, but this feeling is an old reflex, not an objective emergency. Once the automatic momentum is interrupted, you must actively install a new behavioral alternative. If your default pattern is to over-accommodate others out of fear of rejection, your new pattern is to pause and hold a calm, neutral boundary. If your default reaction to uncertainty is to frantically search for instant guarantees, your new pattern is to tolerate the silence of the unknown without scrambling for false security. This process requires immense self-compassion. The old neural pathways were built to protect you, even if they are no longer serving you well. When you stumble, and you will stumble. Avoid the trap of harsh self-criticism, which only reactivates the stress brain and reinforces the very patterns you are trying to escape. Instead, treat yourself with the patient firmness of a wise mentor guiding a student through a difficult skill. As you consistently choose new responses to old triggers, the brain begins to physically rewire itself. The old, frantic highways of desperation gradually weaken through disuse, while the new pathways of inner authority and deliberate calm grow thicker, faster, and more automatic. You stop reacting like a passenger tossed about by every emotional storm and begin operating as the steady captain of your own mind. That is how real transformation takes root. Not in sweeping, cinematic moments of sudden revelation, but in the quiet, courageous victories of choosing a different response today than you did yesterday. Chapter Summary. Intellectual awareness of beliefs is not enough to change behavior because repetitive habits carve deep physical neural pathways in the brain. Neuroplasticity enables the brain to rewire itself, but transformation requires active interruption of old habits and deliberate rehearsal of new responses. Every limiting cycle begins with a trigger that fires an automatic survival script of panic, urgency, and frantic compensation. Introducing a conscious pause between a trigger and your response creates the vital space needed to reclaim personal choice. Breaking old patterns involves tolerating the discomfort of uncertainty instead of scrambling for immediate, reactive false security. Practicing self-compassion during setbacks prevents the stress brain from reactivating, keeping new neural pathways open for growth. Consistent, small-scale behavioral choices gradually build automatic pathways of inner calm and authority, replacing old survival. Chapter 6: The Science of Emotion and Feeling. We often treat emotions as inconvenient weather systems that pass through us, demanding shelter until they finally clear away. We view fear as an enemy to defeat, anxiety as a malfunction to fix, and desire as an itch that must be scratched immediately. Yet, neuroscience and emotional intelligence reveal that emotions are not random disruptions at all. They are sophisticated, biologically coded messenger systems designed to translate raw sensory data into actionable information about our internal and external environment. To understand how emotional dynamics keep us trapped in the cycle of chasing, we must distinguish between an emotion and a feeling. An emotion is a rapid, automated physiological response, a surge of neurochemicals like cortisol or dopamine triggered by an environmental stimulus. It lasts only a matter of seconds in the bloodstream. A feeling, however, is what happens when the conscious mind attaches a story to that raw physical sensation. When your heart rate quickens and your stomach tightens, your brain rapidly searches for a narrative: I am failing, I am losing control, I am not going to make it. When you chase life from desperation, you are almost always reacting to an unmanaged feeling rather than a present-moment reality. Because modern society conditions us to fear discomfort, we treat negative feelings like emotional emergencies. The moment a wave of uncertainty, loneliness, or inadequacy arises, our instinct is to run away from it as fast as possible. We dive headfirst into frantic activity, compulsive scrolling, overworking, or rushing into unaligned relationships simply to numb the internal ache. We mistake the frantic attempt to escape our feelings for productive ambition. This desperate avoidance backfires biochemically. When you try to outrun or suppress an uncomfortable feeling, you signal to your nervous system that the discomfort is indeed dangerous. This intensifies the physiological alarm, creating a feedback loop of mounting panic. You end up trapped in a cycle of emotional firefighting, spending all your energy trying to put out sparks while ignoring the dry brush fueling the fire. Emotional mastery requires a radical pivot in how you relate to your inner world. Instead of running from discomfort, you learn to turn toward it with calm curiosity. When anxiety or scarcity arises, rather than immediately picking up the phone to force a text, checking your bank account for the 10th time, or frantically searching for external reassurance, you pause. You drop your attention down out of the racing narrative in your head and into the physical sensation in your body. You notice the tightness in your chest or the knot in your stomach without judging it as a catastrophe. You gently breathe into the sensation and remind yourself of a liberating truth: a feeling is just energy moving through the body. It cannot destroy you unless you feed it with catastrophic stories. When you allow an emotion to be fully felt without reacting to it, something remarkable happens. The nervous system realizes there is no actual predator present. The physiological charge begins to dissipate naturally, burning itself out in the safety of your conscious awareness. This capacity to sit with emotional discomfort is the bedrock of inner authority. When you are no longer terrified of your own feelings, you stop making reactive choices designed to escape temporary discomfort. You stop chasing people, validation, or outcomes simply because the silence of solitude feels uncomfortable. You become emotionally sovereign. You can stand firmly in the midst of uncertainty, knowing that you possess the internal capacity to weather any emotional storm without compromising your peace, your boundaries, or your self-worth. Chapter Summary. Emotions are rapid, automated physiological responses, while feelings are the mental stories we attach to those physical sensations. Desperate chasing is often driven by an urgent need to escape uncomfortable feelings rather than a genuine pursuit of inspired goals. Trying to outrun or suppress discomfort signals danger to the nervous system, intensifying panic and creating an exhausting feedback loop. Emotional mastery requires turning toward discomfort with calm curiosity instead of frantically searching for external distractions or relief. Recognizing physical sensations without judgment allows the nervous system to realize there is no actual emergency present. Allowing emotions to run their course lets the physiological charge dissipate naturally through the safety of conscious awareness. Developing emotional sovereignty frees. Chapter 7, Imagination and Mental Rehearsal. We live in a culture that worships physical hustle while largely ignoring the unseen laboratory where all human reality is first constructed, the imagination. We assume that creation happens only when our hands are moving, our keyboards are clicking, or our feet are pounding the pavement. Yet, neuroscience reveals that the human brain does not fully distinguish between vivid mental simulation and actual physical experience. When you imagine an event with intense emotional clarity, you fire the exact same neural networks as if you were living it in real time. This neurological reality is a double-edged sword. When you operate from scarcity and desperation, your imagination becomes an engine of self-sabotage. Because your survival brain is hypervigilant, it spends hours mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You lie awake in the dark vividly constructing rejection letters, financial ruin, or failed relationships, playing these tragic movies over and over in your mind. Every time you run those mental simulations, you flood your nervous system with stress hormones, conditioning your body to live in a future disaster that hasn't even happened yet. This chronic mental rehearsal of lack creates a profound energetic mismatch. You might spend your days trying to project confidence and success, but if your private inner theater is constantly broadcasting panic, scarcity, and desperate pleading, that is the frequency your nervous system internalizes. Your physical posture, your vocal tone, and your micro-expressions all leak the anxiety of the disaster movies playing on your mental screen. Others sense this dissonance instantly, and reality responds in kind. Transforming your life requires reclaiming the power of your imagination and turning it from an instrument of anxiety into a tool of intentional creation. This is not about engaging in magical thinking or pretending that challenges do not exist. Rather, it is about disciplined mental rehearsal. Just as an elite athlete mentally runs through a flawless performance before stepping onto the field, you must learn to practice the internal state of wholeness, calm authority, and aligned success before it manifests in your physical reality. When you sit in quiet reflection, consciously direct your imagination toward what you desire, but do so from a feeling of completeness rather than lack. If you are visualizing a career milestone or a healthy relationship, do not imagine it as a life raft you are desperately grabbing to save yourself from drowning. Instead, visualize experiencing it from a place of deep inner security, knowing that your worth is already whole, and this new chapter is simply an enjoyable expression of your growth. This kind of mental rehearsal changes your neurobiology. It builds new neural pathways of confidence and expectancy, lowering your resting cortisol levels and teaching your nervous system what peace actually feels like. When your brain becomes familiar with the internal feeling of security, you stop chasing your goals out of panic. You begin moving toward them with the relaxed, steady assurance of someone who knows they are already walking in the right direction. Your imagination stops being a theater of fear and becomes the quiet workshop where your new reality is shaped. Chapter Summary. The brain fires the same neural networks during vivid mental simulation as it does during actual physical experiences. Operating from scarcity causes the mind to constantly rehearse worst-case scenarios, flooding the body with chronic stress hormones. Mentally replaying future disasters creates an energetic dissonance that undermines efforts to project confidence and secure opportunities. Reclaiming the imagination transforms it from an engine of anxiety into a disciplined tool for intentional creation and self-mastery. Visualizing goals from a place of inner completeness prevents the mental imagery from feeling like a desperate attempt to escape lack. Practicing mental rehearsal of security and calm rewires the nervous system, lowering stress and fostering relaxed assurance. Aligning your internal mental theater with confidence stops the frantic. Chapter 8, Faith, Persistence, and Action. When people hear the phrase, "stop chasing," a common misconception immediately arises. They fear that letting go of desperation means slipping into passive resignation, abandoning their goals, sitting back on the couch, and waiting for the universe to drop their desires into their lap. They worry that if they stop pushing with white-knuckled intensity, nothing will ever get done. This misunderstanding stems from a false dichotomy that assumes human productivity must either be driven by frantic panic or non-existent altogether. True transformation requires understanding the profound difference between desperate forcing and purposeful persistence. Desperate forcing is born from the belief that you are the sole engine of your survival, that time is running out, and that if you don't bully reality into submission right now, everything will collapse. It is exhausting, anxious, and ultimately counterproductive. Purposeful persistence, on the other hand, is born from quiet conviction. It combines unwavering faith in your direction with disciplined, day-by-day action, entirely free from the frantic hysteria of scarcity. To see this distinction in action, look at the nature of true mastery in any craft. A master carpenter does not scream at the wood, panic over the grain, or rush the carving out of a terror that the chair will never take shape. Instead, they approach the material with calm respect, steady hands, and rhythmic consistency. They measure twice, cut with precision, and trust that if they perform the small steps correctly, the finished piece will naturally emerge. Their focus is entirely on the quality of the immediate action, not on an obsessive anxiety about the final product. When you bring this mindset to your own life's work, the entire experience of ambition changes. You stop treating every setback as a mortal wound and start treating obstacles as ordinary feedback. If a business venture hits a rough patch, or a creative project requires a complete rewrite, you do not spiral into an existential crisis. You simply adjust your sails, learn the lesson, and take the next sensible step. You maintain persistence because your self-worth is no longer tied to the outcome of this single effort. You are free to fail forward without breaking your spirit. This is where authentic faith enters the picture, not in a dogmatic or mystical sense, but as a deep psychological trust in the natural laws of growth. Faith is the quiet confidence that seeds planted in fertile soil take time to germinate beneath the surface long before any green shoot breaks the earth. When you operate from this space, you stop digging up your seeds every morning to check if they are growing. You do your part with excellence, maintain your boundaries, put in the required daily work, and then grant reality the space to do its part. Action driven by inner authority is infinitely more powerful than action driven by panic. When you release the frantic need to prove your worth through endless hustle, your energy becomes focused, calm, and magnetic. You make fewer erratic moves, execute your plans with surgical precision, and attract collaborators who respect your grounded composure. You realize that you do not need to sweat and bleed for every inch of progress, you simply need to align your daily efforts with your deepest values and let steady, unshakable persistence do the rest. Chapter Summary. Releasing desperate chasing does not mean sliding into passive resignation or abandoning ambition altogether. Desperate forcing is driven by panic and scarcity, while purposeful persistence is rooted in quiet conviction and steady execution. Approaching your goals with calm mastery resembles a skilled artisan working with patient focus rather than frantic anxiety. Treating setbacks as normal feedback instead of existential crises allows you to fail forward without compromising your self-worth. Authentic faith provides the psychological trust to let planted seeds germinate without constantly digging them up out of impatience. Aligning daily efforts with your deepest values transforms frantic hustle into focused, calm, and magnetic execution. Steady, unshakable persistence combined with inner. Chapter 9, Overcoming Fear, Doubt, and Resistance. Fear is often misdiagnosed as an external enemy that attacks us out of nowhere. We tend to view doubt as an unwelcome intruder that sneaks into our minds to sabotage our happiness. Yet, psychological and behavioral science reveal a much more intimate truth: fear, doubt, and resistance are internal navigational signals generated by the brain's attempt to protect us from the unknown. The moment you decide to step out of familiar patterns, drop your desperate chasing, and build an authentic life from inner authority, your nervous system experiences a jolt of alarm. It mistakes your personal growth for a dangerous wilderness. To understand why resistance feels so intensely uncomfortable, we must examine the brain's deep-seated preference for predictability over happiness. Your mind would rather inhabit a miserable, highly familiar prison of chronic scarcity than venture into the vast, uncertain territory of true freedom. Familiarity equals safety in the eyes of the primitive brain, whereas the unknown equals mortal peril. Therefore, whenever you attempt to expand your boundaries, speak your truth, or release your desperate grip on outcomes, your internal alarm system fires aggressively. Doubt whispers that you are making a terrible mistake, fear swells in your chest, and resistance locks your feet in place. Most people misinterpret this internal resistance as a sign of failure. The moment fear arises, they conclude that they are on the wrong path, that they lack what it takes, or that the universe is signaling them to retreat back to their comfort zone. They surrender their power to the loudest voice in their head, retreating safely into the predictable confines of their old anxieties. They trade their potential for temporary relief, perpetuating the very cycle of stagnation they desperately want to escape. Overcoming this resistance requires developing a completely new relationship with fear. You must learn to stop treating fear as a stop sign and start recognizing it as a reliable compass. In personal transformation, fear is almost always proportional to the magnitude of your growth. If a decision or a new direction does not evoke a certain amount of internal resistance, it is rarely transformative, it is merely an extension of your current reality. When you understand this dynamic, your internal landscape shifts. Instead of panicking when doubt arrives, you can look it in the eye and acknowledge its protective intent without obeying its commands. Developing this kind of psychological courage requires small, deliberate exposures to discomfort. You do not conquer fear by diving headfirst into terrifying situations, you build resilience the way a muscle grows under tension, through progressive overload. If you struggle with the fear of rejection, you start by setting a small, manageable boundary in a low-stakes environment. If you struggle with the terror of financial uncertainty, you practice making one calm, measured decision instead of spiraling into catastrophic financial daydreams. Every time you face a trigger, feel the familiar swell of resistance, and choose to remain grounded anyway, you send a powerful new signal to your nervous system. This is the crucible where true confidence is forged. Confidence is not the absence of fear, it is the proven trust in your ability to handle fear when it arises. When you stop running away from your doubts and start walking straight through them with calm self-possession, the architecture of your mind changes. The resistance that once locked you in place loses its paralyzing grip, transforming into a quiet backdrop of static while you move deliberately toward your vision. You realize that you do not need the absence of fear to create the life you desire, you only need the courage to act while fear is sitting quietly in the back seat. Chapter Summary. Fear and doubt are not external enemies, but internal alarms generated by the brain when facing unfamiliar territory. The primitive brain prefers the misery of familiar patterns over the uncertainty of genuine freedom and personal growth. Misinterpreting internal resistance as a stop sign causes many people to retreat prematurely back into their comfort zones. Recognizing fear as a compass rather than a warning sign reveals that growth and resistance always travel hand in hand. Developing psychological courage involves small, progressive exposures to discomfort rather than reckless leaps into the unknown. True confidence is not the absence of fear, but the proven trust in your capacity to act while feeling afraid. Walking steadily through resistance transforms paralyzing panic into a quiet backdrop, anchoring your actions in unshakable. Chapter 10. Relationships change when neediness ends. Few arenas of human experience reveal the destructive power of desperation quite like our relationships. Whether in romance, marriage, close friendships, or professional alliances, the moment we approach other people with an underlying panic that we cannot survive without their approval, affection, or validation, the entire dynamic shifts. We stop relating to them as sovereign human beings and begin treating them as emotional life rafts. This unspoken pressure turns ordinary interactions into quiet battlegrounds of anxiety, expectation, and subtle manipulation. To understand why neediness destroys connection, we must examine the mechanics of emotional projection. When you secretly believe that you are incomplete on your own, you place an impossible burden on the people around you. You expect a partner, a friend, or a mentor to fill the bottomless void of your self-doubt, soothe your insecurities, and grant you a permanent certificate of worthiness. No human being on earth has the emotional bandwidth to carry the weight of another person's entire existential security. When partners feel that crushing weight, their instinctive reaction is to create distance, withdraw their affection, or put up defensive walls to protect their own sanity. This dynamic explains the heartbreaking cycle of anxious attachment. The more desperate you become to secure a partner's attention, the more tightly you grip them, constantly monitoring their moods, overanalyzing their texts, and sacrificing your own boundaries just to keep the peace. Yet, your frantic grip communicates loud and clear that you do not trust them, you do not trust yourself, and you are terrified of being alone. That energetic signature feels suffocating. Ironically, the very behaviors you deploy to prevent abandonment are the exact behaviors that make people want to leave. True relational transformation begins the moment you shift from needy attachment to emotional independence. Emotional independence does not mean you are cold, detached, or aloof, it means you recognize that your well-being is your own responsibility. When you walk into a relationship knowing that you are already whole, you stop negotiating for scraps of validation. You no longer need the other person to complete you, rescue you, or prove your worth. You are simply sharing your life with someone else out of mutual appreciation, curiosity, and joy, not out of existential panic. This internal shift completely transforms your interactions. When you stop needing people to validate you, you finally have the capacity to truly see them. You can listen without planning your defense, love without demanding a guarantee, and hold boundaries without feeling guilty. If someone disagrees with you or pulls away, you feel sad, but you do not experience it as a fatal blow to your identity. You remain anchored in your own self-worth. Remarkably, others respond profoundly to this energetic sovereignty. People are magnetically drawn to those who do not require rescue. When you stop chasing validation and start standing firmly in your own emotional authority, relationships stop feeling like anxious negotiations and begin feeling like safe, expansive harbors. You attract partners who are whole, grounded, and capable of deep, reciprocal intimacy. You discover that love is not something you have to beg for, chase down, or manipulate into existence. When neediness ends, genuine connection simply and naturally begins. Chapter Summary. Approaching relationships from emotional desperation turns other people into accidental life rafts for our unmanaged self-doubt. Expecting a partner to fill an internal void places an impossible burden on them, triggering instinctive withdrawal and defensive walls. Anxious attachment behaviors like clinging, over-monitoring, and boundary sacrifice often push people away while trying to secure them. Emotional independence means taking full responsibility for your own well-being instead of relying on external validation to feel complete. Approaching connections from wholeness allows you to listen deeply, love freely, and hold firm boundaries without guilt. Relinquishing the need for rescue transforms relationships from anxious negotiations into safe, expansive harbors of mutual respect. When neediness ends, you naturally attract grounded, whole individuals, allowing authentic, reciprocal. Chapter 11, Success arrives differently when you stop forcing it. We live in a culture that worships the gospel of the grind. We are fed a steady diet of narratives celebrating sleepless nights, relentless hustle, and the brutal force required to conquer the business world. We are taught that if we are not bleeding for our ambitions every single day, we simply do not want success badly enough. This relentless push conditions us to view achievement as an ongoing battle against an uncooperative universe, where every milestone must be extracted through sheer exhaustion and unyielding pressure. Yet, if you examine the trajectories of people who achieve sustainable, long-term mastery, a very different picture emerges. True success does not belong exclusively to the most panicked hustler in the room. It belongs to the person who learns how to align disciplined action with emotional equilibrium. When you approach your career, your business, or your financial goals from a place of desperation, believing that your net worth dictates your human worth, your entire approach becomes erratic. You chase every shiny object, pivot out of panic at the first sign of a downturn, and make high-stakes decisions driven by short-term survival rather than long-term vision. This frantic energy creates immense friction in the professional world. Clients, partners, and investors can smell desperation from a mile away. When you pitch an idea or negotiate a contract while radiating an unspoken panic that you desperately need this deal to save your ego or your finances, you shift the power dynamic entirely. You invite exploitation, project untrustworthiness, and signal that you are operating from scarcity. People hesitate to partner with those who look like they are one minor setback away from total collapse. When you break free from the compulsion to force outcomes, your professional posture undergoes a quiet revolution. You stop treating every professional interaction as a life-or-death tribunal. Instead, you begin operating from a deep sense of strategic patience. You focus your energy on building genuine competence, refining your craft, delivering exceptional value, and cultivating long-term relationships without an immediate, needy demand for reciprocation. You do the unglamorous daily work with steady discipline, trusting that reliable execution compounds over time. This shift in state changes how opportunity presents itself. When your nervous system is calm and your mind is clear of panic, your peripheral vision expands. You begin noticing subtle market shifts, creative collaborations, and innovative solutions that were entirely invisible to you when you were trapped in tunnel vision. You make measured, calculated risks instead of reckless gambling moves. You stop reacting to temporary market volatility with emotional panic and start navigating it with the steady hand of an experienced navigator. Sustainable achievement is not about forcing doors open with your shoulders until you bruise. It is about building a vessel strong enough to carry the current when the tide finally turns in your favor. When you stop chasing success out of an existential terror of irrelevance, you free up the mental bandwidth required to actually sustain it. Success stops feeling like a fragile house of cards built on frantic hustle and begins feeling like the natural, inevitable byproduct of a grounded, focused, and disciplined mind doing meaningful work day after day. Chapter Summary. Cultural narratives often glorify frantic hustle and exhaustion, equating relentless pressure with true ambition and success. Approaching professional goals from scarcity leads to erratic decision-making, chasing shiny objects, and operating out of short-term panic. Radiating unspoken desperation in business negotiations shifts power dynamics unfavorably and deters potential partners or clients. Shifting away from forced outcomes allows you to cultivate strategic patience, master your craft, and build genuine, long-term competence. A calm nervous system expands your peripheral vision, helping you notice subtle opportunities and navigate market volatility with clarity. Sustainable achievement relies on disciplined daily execution rather than relying on desperate force to batter doors down. When you stop chasing success out of fear, your accomplishments become the natural byproduct of a grounded. Chapter 12, Daily Habits That Keep You Grounded. Transforming your life from a state of frantic chasing to quiet inner authority is not achieved through a single, monumental decision made in a moment of inspiration. High-flown epiphanies are exhilarating, but they fade quickly when exposed to the abrasive friction of ordinary, everyday life. If you want to permanently alter your baseline from scarcity to wholeness, you must anchor your transformation in the unglamorous soil of daily habits. How you spend your ordinary hours dictates the energetic frequency from which you build your entire world. To maintain your internal anchor amidst the chaos of modern life, you must intentionally design daily practices that regulate your nervous system. When your mornings begin with a frantic dash to check your phone, scroll through social media, or review a laundry list of looming crises, you hand the steering wheel of your brain straight over to your survival system. You flood your bloodstream with cortisol before your feet even touch the floor, priming yourself for a day of reactive chasing. Breaking this cycle requires a sacred pause at the start of your day, a deliberate ritual of stillness that tells your biology that you are safe, secure, and sovereign. This morning anchor does not require hours of esoteric ritual, it requires quiet consistency. It can be as simple as 10 minutes of unhurried breathing, journaling your thoughts without judgment, or sitting quietly with a cup of coffee while observing your breath. The specific activity matters far less than the internal state it cultivates. You are training your nervous system to rest in the present moment rather than immediately leaping into the anxious future. You are reminding your brain that your worth and peace are not contingent upon how fast you can start running on the treadmill of obligations. As you move through the day, protecting your internal grounding requires micropauses. In the middle of an intense meeting, a difficult conversation, or a sudden logistical hurdle, our default tendency is to speed up our breathing, tighten our muscles, and rush toward a frantic solution. You must train yourself to use those exact moments as tripwires for awareness. When you feel the familiar internal rush of urgency, catch yourself, drop your shoulders, take one deep, deliberate breath, and slow your pace. That single conscious second disrupts the automatic momentum of panic and restores your access to higher executive functioning. Equally vital is the practice of evening reflection and integration. At the close of the day, before surrendering to sleep, take a few moments to review how you moved through your experiences. Did you act from quiet authority, or did you slip back into desperate forcing? Do not judge your missteps with harsh criticism, simply observe them with the compassionate detachment of an objective scientist. Acknowledge the moments where you caught yourself chasing approval or fighting reality, and consciously release them. These daily habits act as the invisible scaffolding of your new identity. They require discipline, but unlike the exhausting discipline of endless hustle, this is the discipline of self-care and emotional stewardship. By consistently tending to your inner state through intentional morning anchors, midday pauses, and evening reflections, you build a resilient, unshakable foundation. You stop relying on willpower alone to resist the urge to chase. You cultivate an internal environment so calm, steady, and secure that frantic desperation simply no longer has room to take root. Chapter Summary. Lasting transformation is anchored in daily habits and routines rather than relying solely on occasional, fleeting moments of inspiration. Starting the day by immediately checking phones or engaging with crises hands control over to the brain's survival alarm system. Intentional morning anchors train the nervous system to rest in the present moment and establish a baseline of inner security. Midday micropauses act as tripwires for awareness, interrupting the automatic momentum of urgency and restoring calm cognitive control. Evening reflection allows you to review your day with compassionate detachment, releasing missteps without falling into self-criticism. The discipline of emotional stewardship replaces the exhausting grind of endless hustle with sustainable, grounded self-mastery. Consistent daily habits build a resilient internal foundation where frantic desperation naturally loses its grip on your life. Chapter 13, Becoming the Person Who No Longer Needs to Chase. We often spend our lives trying to acquire new things, better titles, deeper relationships, or greater financial security under the assumption that having those things will finally make us feel secure, worthy, and complete. We invest immense energy into changing our external circumstances, believing that our environment dictates our identity. Yet, true and lasting transformation moves in precisely the opposite direction. You do not become secure by acquiring security, you acquire security by becoming the person who no longer operates from lack. Identity is the invisible lens through which every action, choice, and boundary is filtered. If your core identity is rooted in the belief that you are an outsider desperately trying to prove your worth, your behavior will perpetually reflect that internal narrative. You will hustle until you burn out, tolerate toxic relationships out of fear of abandonment, and cling tightly to every opportunity as if it were your last. No amount of external success can ever fill an identity deficit, because a person who feels internally impoverished will always experience abundance as an anxious illusion waiting to vanish. Shifting your identity requires a profound departure from the person you were conditioned to be. It demands that you stop outsourcing your self-definition to the opinions of others, the approval of society, or the fluctuation of your bank account. You must consciously step into the role of an architect rather than a tenant in your own life. This means asking a defining question: how would I move, speak, decide, and love if I already knew my worth was absolute and my future was secure? When you begin answering that question through your daily choices, your external reality starts to reorganize itself. A person who believes in their intrinsic wholeness does not chase after people who mistreat them, they calmly walk away. A professional who operates from inner authority does not panic in the face of temporary setbacks, they evaluate the data with a clear head and adjust their strategy. An individual grounded in emotional independence does not beg life for permission to be happy. They cultivate joy as an internal discipline. This identity shift requires letting go of familiar versions of yourself. Often, the hardest part of personal growth is not stepping into the new, unknown territory of success, but grieving the comfortable familiarity of the old self. You may have spent decades identifying as the perpetual underdog, the anxious overachiever, or the martyr who sacrifices their own peace for everyone else's approval. Dropping those old identities can feel disorienting, as if you are shedding a heavy coat you have worn your entire life, leaving you feeling momentarily exposed. Yet, that exposure is simply the feeling of freedom. As you consistently inhabit your new identity, acting from alignment rather than anxiety, and from wholeness rather than hunger, your nervous system adapts to the new normal. You stop looking in the mirror and seeing a person who is scrambling to catch up with life. Instead, you recognize someone who stands firmly in their own power, completely at home in their own skin. You realize that you do not need to chase your dreams down anymore, because you have finally become the person that your dreams are naturally drawn to meet. Chapter Summary. Trying to acquire external achievements to fix an internal sense of inadequacy is a futile pursuit that never yields true peace. Your identity acts as the invisible filter for your choices, dictating whether you operate from inner wholeness or persistent lack. Shifting your identity requires moving from an external focus on acquisition to an internal commitment to self-definition and authority. Acting from a foundational belief in your own absolute worth changes how you handle boundaries, setbacks, and relationships. Letting go of familiar, outdated versions of yourself can feel disorienting, but that discomfort is the sensation of true liberation. Consistency in embodying your new identity rewires your nervous system to accept security and confidence as your permanent baseline. When you stop chasing life and step fully into your empowered identity, your external reality. Chapter 14, Living with Openness Instead of Control. Human beings possess an extraordinary, almost obsessive desire for certainty. From the moment we wake up until we close our eyes at night, our minds are constantly trying to script the future, anticipate every potential hazard, and wrap our arms tightly around outcomes to ensure nothing slips through our fingers. We create elaborate plans, map out contingencies for contingencies, and view uncertainty as a personal insult or a dangerous threat to our well-being. We assume that if we just monitor every variable closely enough, we can bully life into cooperating with our exact design. Yet, this relentless drive for control is one of the most exhausting traps of the human experience. Life is inherently dynamic, fluid, and brilliantly unpredictable. The universe operates on a scale far vaster than our conscious minds can ever map. When you grip your plans, your timelines, and your expectations with white-knuckled rigidity, you turn your life into a fragile fortress. Every unexpected delay, every cancelled contract, and every sudden shift in circumstance feels like a catastrophic breach of your walls, plunging you straight back into panic and despair. Living with openness instead of control is not an invitation to be careless, lazy, or indifferent. It is a profound psychological and emotional maturation. It is the realization that your job is not to dictate the exact timing, method, and packaging of every single blessing in your life, but rather to show up with clarity, integrity, and excellence, and then grant reality the freedom to deliver results in its own surprising ways. When you stop trying to micromanage the universe, an immense weight lifts from your shoulders. Consider the difference between a sailor navigating a turbulent ocean with a death grip on the rudder, screaming at the wind to change direction, and a master sailor who trims the sails with calm, flexible awareness. The master sailor respects the power of the wind, reads the shifts in the water, and uses the currents to glide toward their destination with grace and efficiency. They do not control the weather, they master their relationship to it. When you approach your goals with openness, you stop treating unexpected detours as failures. If a door closes unexpectedly, you no longer collapse into an existential crisis, assuming your future is ruined. Instead, you look for the hidden pivot point, trusting that reality may be redirecting you toward something far more aligned with your growth than the rigid blueprint you drafted in your anxiety. You begin to view life not as an adversary that must be subdued, but as an intelligent partner with whom you are collaborating. This shift from control to openness completely transforms your daily peace. You stop losing sleep over things you cannot change and pour your entire focus into mastering the things you can: your character, your emotional state, your daily disciplines, and your capacity to love and serve. You realize that true security does not come from locking down every variable in your external environment, but from cultivating an unshakable trust in your own adaptability. When you let go of the steering wheel of forced control and step into the flow of open presence, you discover that life has a way of supporting you far better than your anxiety ever could. Chapter Summary. The obsessive human drive for certainty and control turns life into a fragile fortress that shatters at the first unexpected shift. Rigidly micromanaging outcomes creates exhausting friction, turning ordinary delays and detours into personal emergencies. Living with openness means abandoning the need to dictate every detail while maintaining high standards of clarity, integrity, and excellence. Operating like a skilled sailor trimming sails rather than fighting the wind allows you to navigate life's currents with grace and efficiency. Approaching unexpected detours as valuable adjustments prevents minor setbacks from triggering devastating existential crises. Shifting focus from uncontrollable external variables to internal mastery fosters deep peace and unshakable self-trust. Releasing forced control opens the door to a collaborative, fluid relationship with life where Chapter 15, when reality begins responding to the person you have been. We have journeyed together across an expansive landscape, tracing the invisible threads that connect our internal states to our external experiences. We began by examining the quiet trap of the chase, that frantic, white-knuckled grip on life born from the deep-seated fear that we are fundamentally lacking, behind, or incomplete. We explored the ancient survival machinery of the brain, the rigid architecture of limiting beliefs, the chemical turbulence of unmanaged feelings, and the subtle ways desperation distorts our relationships, our careers, and our self-worth. We dismantled the myth that hustle requires panic, that control equals security, and that love and success must be begged for, wrestled down, or extracted through sheer exhaustion. In their place, we laid down a new foundation. The quiet, unshakable architecture of inner authority. Now, we arrive at the culmination of this journey. We return to the profound paradox introduced on the very first page, viewing it now not as a clever riddle, but as an absolute law of human existence. The moment you stop chasing life from a place of panic and lack, reality begins responding to the person you have become. Consider what fundamentally changes when you integrate these truths. When you step off the treadmill of desperate striving, your nervous system finally exits survival mode. Your prefrontal cortex comes fully online, restoring your capacity for strategic wisdom, emotional intelligence, and creative flow. You stop projecting an invisible aura of neediness into your interactions. Others no longer feel the suffocating weight of your unmanaged insecurities, allowing them to lean in toward you with authentic warmth, trust, and mutual respect. Your relationship with your goals transforms entirely. Ambition ceases to be a frantic attempt to prove your worth and becomes a joyful expression of your potential. You do your daily work with calm precision, maintain your boundaries without guilt, and cultivate strategic patience. You no longer demand that the universe bend to your exact timelines or panic when detours appear on the horizon. You trust the process of growth because you know your stability is rooted deep within yourself, entirely independent of fluctuating external circumstances. This is the ultimate secret of personal transformation. Reality is an acoustic mirror. It does not hand you what you desperately beg for, it reflects back to you who you authentically are. If you broadcast panic, scarcity, and fear, life responds by providing chaotic challenges that validate those very fears. But when you anchor yourself in quiet confidence, emotional sovereignty, and absolute self-worth, the entire mirror shifts. Doors that once required bruising force begin opening with surprising ease. Opportunities align with organic momentum. Relationships become safe harbors of reciprocal depth. You no longer look out at the world with a sense of frantic urgency, wondering when your life is finally going to begin. You realize that your life is happening right now, in this breath, anchored in the sovereign authority of your own mind. You have stopped running away from who you thought you were, and you have finally stepped fully into who you were always meant to be. Take a deep, grounding breath. Feel the quiet strength settling into your shoulders, the steady rhythm of your heart, and the profound peace of knowing that you are already whole. You do not need to chase your future down anymore. You have become the person your future is naturally drawn to meet. Step forward into your world with quiet confidence, open hands, and an unshakable spirit. The chase is over. Your real life is ready. Chapter Summary. Bringing the journey together reveals that reality responds directly to our internal state and who we have chosen to become. Exiting survival mode restores higher cognitive functions, emotional intelligence, and calm strategic focus through inner authority. Releasing desperate energy removes the suffocating weight of neediness from relationships, inviting authentic and reciprocal connections. Transforming ambition turns goals from frantic attempts to prove self-worth into joyful, disciplined expressions of personal potential. Life acts as an acoustic mirror, reflecting back the confidence, wholeness, and emotional sovereignty we cultivate from within. Doors begin to open with organic momentum when you replace forced control and panic with grounded, patient execution. The journey concludes with the liberating realization that you no longer need to